In 1887, in one of America's richest industrial cities, a woman stepped out of a millionaire's life and was never seen again. No struggle, no witnesses, no body. Pittsburgh woke up to whispers, rumors, and a mystery so unsettling that newspapers across the country couldn't let it go. How does the wife of a powerful millionaire vanish without a single trace in a city filled with servants, factories, and watchful eyes? What investigators uncovered only raised more questions. And the truth they suspected was more disturbing than anyone expected. If you're drawn to forgotten mysteries and true stories, history tried to erase, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. And before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from, your city, state, or country. Now, let's uncover the chilling 1887 Pittsburgh mystery that still has no answers. On a cold November morning in 1887, the city of Pittsburgh woke to a scandal that would grip the nation for months to come. A woman of extraordinary wealth, social prominence, and seemingly impeccable standing had vanished without a trace from behind the locked doors of one of the most imposing mansions on Fifth Avenue. Her name was Catherine Ashworth Hardcastle, and her disappearance would expose the dark underbelly of a wealthy family's carefully constructed world. What unfolded over the following days was not a simple case of a woman running away from her life. It was something far more complex, far more troubling, and far more dangerous than anyone dared to admit in those first confused hours after she was discovered to be gone. The newspapers would eventually call it the crime of the century. The police would become so bewildered by the contradictions in the evidence that they would find themselves chasing shadows. The family would stand to gain everything from her absence, yet claim complete innocence. And Catherine's own secrets that had been locked away in diaries, whispered conversations, and late-night meetings, would come to light only after it was far too late to do her any good. This is the story of what happened in Pittsburgh when the wife of one of America's wealthiest industrial magnates simply vanished. This is the story of a woman whose life became a prison long before she disappeared from it entirely. To understand what happened to Catherine Hardcastle, we must first understand the woman herself and the world in which she lived. Catherine Ashworth was born in 1850 into a family of considerable means. Her father, William Ashworth, had made his fortune in the railroad business, and her mother, Eleanor, came from one of Philadelphia's most distinguished families. From childhood, Catherine was groomed for one specific purpose: to marry well, to marry wealthy, and to marry within her station. The 1870s were a time of transformation in America. The Industrial Revolution had created a new class of extraordinarily rich men. Men who had clawed their way to the top through determination, ruthlessness, and often questionable business practices. These men controlled railroads, steel mills, coal mines, and banking enterprises. They built mansions that rivaled European palaces. They accumulated art, jewelry, and property at a pace that seemed almost obscene to those watching from below. And they sought wives who could help them solidify their social position, women who could grace their tables, manage their households, and produce heirs to continue their dynasties. Augustus Hardcastle was one of these men. Born in 1832, he had started with almost nothing. His father was a merchant of modest means, but Augustus possessed a hunger that seemed insatiable. He entered the steel business at the age of 25, just as Pittsburgh was beginning its transformation into the steel capital of the world. Within 2 decades, Hardcastle had accumulated a fortune estimated at somewhere between $8 and $12 million. an almost incomprehensible sum at the time. His mills operated across western Pennsylvania. His influence extended into banking, railroads, and politics. When Catherine Ashworth first met Augustus Hardcastle in 1871, she was 21 years old. She was tall, with auburn hair that seemed to catch the light in a particular way that made people stop and look at her. She was educated, having attended a private academy in Philadelphia. She spoke French and Italian. She had traveled to Europe twice. She was, by all accounts, an exceptional young woman of her class. Augustus Hardcastle was 39 years old, a widower whose first wife had died 5 years earlier without producing any children. He was a man of considerable power and considerably less charm. Their courtship lasted 6 months. Those who witnessed it reported that Catherine seemed reserved, even reluctant. Her mother, Eleanor, was pushing for the match with some urgency. A marriage to Augustus Hardcastle would cement the Ashworth family's position in the highest circles of American society. William Ashworth and Augustus Hardcastle began negotiating what amounted to a business arrangement disguised as a love match. By the spring of 1872, Catherine had agreed to become Mrs. Augustus Hardcastle. They married in June of that year at St. Andrew's Cathedral in Philadelphia. The ceremony was attended by everyone of importance in 2 states. The guest list included senators, judges, railroad magnates, and members of the highest society. The bride wore white silk and Brussels lace. The groom wore black and looked, according to one observer, as pleased with the proceedings as a man might look while concluding a particularly favorable business transaction. The Hardcastles took up residence in Pittsburgh, where Augustus had already begun constructing what would become the most talked-about mansion in the city. The house stood on Fifth Avenue, a neighborhood that would come to be known as Millionaire's Row. It was a 3-story, Victorian mansion of red brick and gray stone, with 43 rooms, including a ballroom, a library, a conservatory, and servants' quarters that could house 20 staff members. The interior was decorated with imported marble, mahogany paneling, Persian carpets, and paintings that had come from European collections. The grounds included a garden designed by a landscape architect brought in from New York, and a carriage house that could accommodate 8 horses. This was Catherine's new world, and she inhabited it with a kind of graceful efficiency that impressed even the most critical observers of Pittsburgh society. She organized balls and dinner parties. She managed the household account with intelligence and restraint. She bore a son in 1873 named William after his maternal grandfather. She bore a daughter in 1875 named Eleanor after her mother. By all external measures, her marriage was a success. But there were rumors. There were always rumors in circles this elevated, whispers that passed between women in drawing rooms, comments made by servants to other servants, hints dropped by people who claimed to have inside information about the private lives of the wealthy. These rumors suggested that Catherine's marriage was less than the perfect partnership it appeared to be from the outside. They suggested that Augustus was a difficult man, a man of violent moods and jealous temperament. They suggested that Catherine had taken to spending time away from the mansion, visiting friends in Philadelphia, making trips to New York that could not entirely be explained by her stated purposes. By 1885, when Catherine was 35 years old, these rumors had acquired a particular focus. There was a man, or so the stories went, a man who had been seen in Catherine's presence on more than one occasion, a man whose identity was the subject of much speculation and considerable debate. Some said he was a musician. Some said he was a poet. Some said he was a doctor who had been called to treat Catherine for a mysterious ailment. What everyone seemed to agree on was that there was a relationship of some kind, one that extended beyond the merely social or professional, one that represented something dangerous to the carefully constructed facade of the Hardcastle marriage. The identity of this man has never been definitively established, despite extensive investigation both then and since. What we know comes from fragments, from letters that were discovered but never fully authenticated, from testimony given by servants who may or may not have been entirely truthful, from the recollections of people who claim to have seen Catherine in his presence. These sources paint a picture that is intriguing but ultimately incomplete. A photograph taken in poor light where the subject remains perpetually out of focus. The most credible accounts suggest that this man was named Thomas Whitmore, though even this detail has been questioned by historians over the years. According to the testimony of Catherine's lady's maid, a woman named Margaret Sullivan, Whitmore was a writer and intellectual who had connections to the literary circles of Philadelphia. He was described as being in his early 40s, educated, well-spoken, and possessed of the kind of charisma that seemed to draw people to him despite their better judgment. He had apparently made Catherine's acquaintance through a mutual friend who was involved in charitable work in the city. The first documented meeting between Catherine and Whitmore took place in the spring of 1885. Catherine had gone to Philadelphia to attend a lecture on contemporary literature at a hall on Chestnut Street. Whitmore was one of the speakers on the program. Margaret Sullivan, the lady's maid, testified that Catherine had attended the event despite the objections of her husband, who had other plans for the evening, and was displeased by her insistence on going. After the lecture, Catherine remained at the venue for some time, speaking with the speakers and other attendees. It was at this gathering that she and Whitmore appear to have first spoken. What happened after that is less clear. There are no letters, no direct evidence, nothing that would hold up in a court of law, but servants talk. And in 1885 and 1886, the servants in Pittsburgh society were talking about the fact that Catherine had developed a new habit. She would leave the house on specified days, claiming to be visiting friends or attending to charitable obligations. She would return hours later with a slightly elevated color in her cheeks and a particular kind of contentment in her expression that had not been present before. On several occasions, visitors to the household reported seeing Catherine studying passages from books and making notes in a journal that she kept hidden from general view. The journals themselves were never found, at least not publicly, but it was later suggested by investigators that such journals may have existed and may have contained evidence of the nature of Catherine's relationship with Thomas Whitmore. If such journals existed, they vanished at the same time Catherine did, and their contents remain unknown to this day. Augustus Hardcastle, despite his business preoccupations, was not a man to miss the shifts in his wife's behavior. He was, by all accounts, a jealous man, a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life and the lives of those around him. He had married Catherine in part because she was beautiful and accomplished, but also because he believed her to be of such elevated social standing that infidelity would be unthinkable to her. The possibility that she might form an attachment to another man seems to have awakened in him something dark and violent. Sometime in the summer of 1886, Augustus became convinced that Catherine was meeting with another man. The exact details of how he reached this conclusion are not known. It may have been something he overheard. It may have been something a servant told him. It may have been merely his own suspicions fed by jealousy and wounded pride. What is known is that his behavior toward Catherine changed markedly in the latter months of 1886 and the early months of 1887. People who visited the mansion reported that Augustus had become increasingly controlling. Catherine was no longer permitted to leave the house without informing him of her destination, and remaining away for only the shortest periods of time. The servants were instructed to monitor her movements and report back to him. On one occasion, a guest witnessed Augustus physically preventing Catherine from leaving the drawing room to speak privately with a female friend who had called on her. The guest described the incident as shocking, an outburst of temper that revealed the ugly underside of the perfect marriage. By October of 1887, Catherine appeared to those around her to be a woman under tremendous strain. She had lost weight. Her complexion had become pallid. She moved through the house as if she were underwater, going through the motions expected of her, but present only in body. She took more frequent headaches and remained in her bedroom for entire days at a time. Her children, now teenagers, noticed the change in their mother and became worried about her health. Her friends in society, when they managed to see her at all, found her distant and distracted. And then, on November 11th, 1887, everything changed. The morning of November 11th, 1887 began like any other morning in the Hardcastle mansion. The servants rose before dawn to begin their daily tasks. The cook, Mrs. Martha Hollis, who had been with the family for 12 years, began preparing breakfast in the kitchen. The housemaids began lighting the fires in the various rooms, drawing the heavy curtains to reveal a gray Pittsburgh morning, cold and slightly damp. The groundskeeper had already been about his work, raking the leaves from the gardens and preparing the grounds for winter. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Mary Brennan, Catherine's personal maid, not Margaret Sullivan, who had been let go by Augustus in August, but a new girl he had hired to replace her, went to Catherine's bedroom to bring her a cup of tea and to lay out her clothes for the day. This was Catherine's routine, and it had not varied in the years that Mary had been employed. Catherine liked to wake early. She was by nature an organized woman who enjoyed her quiet hours before the household fully awakened. What Mary found when she entered Catherine's bedroom stopped her dead in her tracks. The bed was empty. It had been slept in, the sheets were disturbed, the pillows showed the indentations of heads, but Catherine was not there. The room was cold, suggesting that the fire had gone out during the night. Catherine's nightclothes were folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. Her day clothes, a dark green dress that the servants had prepared the evening before, were gone from the wardrobe where Mary had hung them. Catherine's everyday shoes were missing from the row of footwear that lined the closet. Mary's first thought was that Catherine had risen early, as she sometimes did, and had gone downstairs. She set down the tea on the side table and made her way back down the corridor to search the main rooms of the house. She found nothing. The drawing room was empty. The library was empty. The conservatory was empty. The dining room had not been laid for breakfast, a sure sign that Catherine had not come down to request it. By this time, the household was beginning to fully wake. Servants were moving through the corridors with greater purpose. The cook was waiting for instructions about the breakfast. The groundskeeper had come inside to report to the head butler. And then Mary made the decision to go upstairs to where Augustus slept in his own suite of rooms, separated from Catherine's apartments by a shared sitting room. She knocked on the door to his dressing room. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder. Augustus emerged moments later, still in his nightclothes. his hair disheveled, his face dark with irritation at being disturbed. Mary stammered out her message. Mrs. Hardcastle was not in her room, and she could not be found anywhere in the house. Augustus's reaction was immediate and theatrical. He demanded to know every detail of what Mary had observed. He instructed her to say nothing to anyone else. He ordered the head butler to search the entire house systematically, from the attic to the basement. He then went to his study and wrote a telegram, which he gave to his secretary to take immediately to the telegraph office. The telegram was addressed to the chief of the Pittsburgh Police Department and read, "Mrs. Catherine Hardcastle is missing. My wife has disappeared from our home. All assistance requested immediately." Within the hour, the Pittsburgh police had arrived at the mansion. Officers fanned out through the house, conducting their own search. They found nothing. Catherine Hardcastle had apparently left no note. She had left behind her jewelry, her money, her fur coats, everything of material value. All that was missing was Catherine herself, along with whatever clothes she had been wearing when she left, and, according to some accounts, a small leather bag that she kept in her wardrobe. The question that the police immediately began asking was the same question that would preoccupy the city for months to come. How had she left the house? The layout of the Hardcastle mansion was such that there were several possible exits from the building. There was the main entrance on Fifth Avenue, which was always locked at night and opened only by the butler in the morning. There were 3 other exterior doors, one that led from the dining room to the garden, one that led from the conservatory to the side garden, and one that led from the kitchen to the servants' yard. All of these doors had been checked by the servants when the search was initiated. All of them were locked from the inside, with the keys hanging in their designated places. The windows on the ground floor were all fitted with metal bars, a precaution against burglary that was common among the wealthy of the era. The windows on the upper floors could theoretically have been used to escape if one had a rope or some other means of descent, but an examination of the grounds revealed no evidence that anyone had scaled the exterior walls. There was no disturbance in the flower beds below the windows. There were no marks on the stone or brick that would suggest the presence of ropes or climbing implements. The servants who had been in the house all night were questioned individually. The butler, James Devereaux, who had been with the family for 15 years, insisted that he had locked the front door at 10 o'clock in the evening and had not opened it again until 5:30 in the morning. The cook, Martha Hollis, reported that she had arrived at 6 o'clock, as she always did, and had entered through the kitchen servant's door using her own key. She found that door had been secured from the inside when she arrived. The housemaids, of whom there were 4, all stated that they had seen nothing unusual during the night and had observed no one leaving the house. Only one person lived outside the main house and commuted to work, the groundskeeper. The others, the butler, the cook, 2 housemaids, the laundry maid, Catherine's personal maid, and 2 other servants who performed various household tasks, all resided in the servants' quarters. The gatekeeper, an older man named Thomas Mackenzie, lived in a small cottage at the entrance to the property. He was questioned extensively about whether anyone had passed through the gates during the night. He stated with apparent sincerity that he had seen nothing, heard nothing, and that no one had left or entered the property between sunset and sunrise. Augustus's own movements during the night became a point of investigation, though this was conducted with considerable delicacy, given his standing in the community. He claimed to have been in his bedroom all night asleep. He could provide no witnesses to corroborate this claim, as he had no wife to confirm his whereabouts and he did not share his bedroom with any other person. Servants testified that they had not seen him leave his rooms at any point during the night, but servants often sleeping, and he could have left without being observed. The police conducted an exhaustive search of the house. They examined every room, every closet, every piece of furniture. They checked behind paintings to see if there were hidden passages, a discovery that had been made in some of the older mansions in the area. They found nothing. Catherine appeared to have genuinely vanished, as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed her. The newspapers, which had been alerted to the disappearance by Augustus himself in a statement released through his lawyers, seized upon the story with extraordinary enthusiasm. "Woman vanishes from locked manor," one headline proclaimed. "Pittsburgh mystery, the impossible disappearance of a millionaire's wife," declared another. Within 2 days, reporters from Philadelphia, New York, and even as far as Boston had descended upon Pittsburgh to cover the story. Theories began to circulate. Some suggested that Catherine had staged her own disappearance, that she had somehow managed to escape the locked house and was now in hiding, perhaps with the mysterious man that some people whispered about. Others suggested that she had been abducted, spirited away by unknown parties in the night through means that no one could quite explain. Still, others suggested darker possibilities that involved foul play within the household itself. Possibilities that were almost too horrible to voice aloud, but that everyone seemed to be thinking about anyway. As the days passed and Catherine remained missing, the police investigation took on an increasingly frantic quality. Detectives were assigned to the case full-time. Interviews were conducted not just with the household staff, but with everyone who had known Catherine, everyone who had seen her, everyone who might possess even the smallest piece of information about her movements or her state of mind in the weeks before she disappeared. It was during these interviews that the name Thomas Whitmore finally emerged publicly. A woman who had been Catherine's friend, Mrs. Adelaide Hartley, reluctantly confirmed that Catherine had been acquainted with a man by that name, that they had encountered each other at literary gatherings in Philadelphia, and that Catherine had seemed quite interested in his writing and his ideas. When pressed, Mrs. Hartley admitted that she had wondered whether the relationship was entirely innocent, though she insisted that she had never observed anything that would constitute proof of impropriety. The police launched a search for Thomas Whitmore. What they discovered was that a man by that name had indeed existed, but that he seemed to have disappeared from his known residences in Philadelphia sometime in the early fall of 1887. His landlady reported that he had given notice that he would be vacating his rooms, had paid his outstanding rent, and had left no forwarding address. Several of his acquaintances reported that he had mentioned, in passing, that he might travel west, that he was thinking of making a fresh start in a new place, but no definitive sighting of Whitmore could be established after mid-September of 1887. Two theories began to solidify in the minds of the investigators. The first theory was that Catherine and Whitmore had somehow arranged to meet, that Catherine had left the locked mansion in a way that was currently inexplicable, had gone to a prearranged location, and had fled the city with Whitmore. They were now, according to this theory, somewhere out west, or perhaps they had even left the country. The second theory was darker, that Whitmore, jealous and unstable, had somehow come to the Hardcastle mansion, had abducted Catherine, and had taken her away against her will. In this scenario, Catherine was not a willing participant in her own disappearance. She was a victim, possibly in danger, possibly beyond help. The authorities in Pittsburgh expanded their search beyond the city limits. Police departments in neighboring towns were contacted. Railroad stations were monitored, with descriptions of both Catherine and Thomas Whitmore circulated widely. Inquiries were made to shipping companies about passengers matching their descriptions. Nothing came to light. It was as if both Catherine and Thomas Whitmore had simply ceased to exist on November 11, 1887. Augustus Hardcastle, during this time, presented a facade of concerned and cooperative cooperation with the investigation. He answered all questions put to him. He provided information about Catherine's habits, her friends, her routines. He offered a reward, a substantial sum, $10,000, for any information leading to Catherine's whereabouts. But those who observed him closely noted that beneath the facade, there was something else. There was a kind of calculation in his eyes. There was a tightness around his mouth that suggested he was controlling his expression with effort. The servants began to speak more openly now that Catherine had been gone for nearly a week. They spoke of the tensions in the household, of the way Augustus had isolated Catherine in the months before her disappearance. They spoke of an incident in August when Margaret Sullivan, the previous lady's maid, had been dismissed without explanation, despite having served the family for several years. They spoke of receiving direct orders from Augustus to monitor his wife's movements and to report back to him. They spoke of finding Augustus going through Catherine's personal effects, her desk, her wardrobe, examining everything with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific. One servant, a woman named Violet O'Shaughnessy, who worked as a kitchen maid, made a statement to the police that would later be viewed as potentially significant. She reported that on the evening of November 10th, she had overheard a conversation between Augustus and Catherine in the hallway outside the dining room. The conversation had been conducted in low voices, but Violet had been able to make out certain phrases. Augustus had said something like, "You will end this foolishness, or I will end it for you." Catherine had replied, "You cannot keep me imprisoned forever." Augustus had responded with words that Violet could not quite make out, but his tone had been one of cold fury. This conversation had taken place less than 12 hours before Catherine disappeared. It suggested that the atmosphere in the household had come to a crisis point. It suggested that Catherine was aware that something had to change, that her situation had become untenable, but it suggested nothing about how she had actually managed to leave a locked house in the middle of the night. 2 weeks after Catherine's disappearance, a crucial piece of evidence came to light. A man named Frederick Morrison, who worked as a clerk at the railway station in Pittsburgh, came forward with information. He reported that on the morning of November 11th, a woman matching Catherine's description had appeared at the station and had purchased a ticket for New York City. The purchase had been made early in the morning, around 6 o'clock, before the station would normally have been crowded with passengers. Morrison remembered the woman specifically because she had seemed distressed, because she had been clutching a small leather bag, and because she had asked several questions about making connections to other cities. This information electrified the investigation. If Catherine had indeed left Pittsburgh by train on the morning of her disappearance, then the locked house mystery became somewhat less mysterious. She had somehow managed to get out of the mansion without using any of the known exits, had made her way to the railway station, and had boarded a train to New York. The identity of the person who had helped her, the means by which she had exited the house, the location of Thomas Whitmore, all of these questions remained, but at least there was now a plausible trajectory for her movements. The New York police were contacted and asked to search for any record of Catherine Hardcastle arriving on a train from Pittsburgh on November 11th. They conducted interviews at the Grand Central Depot and at other railway terminals. Several station workers reported seeing a woman matching Catherine's description, but the accounts were vague and contradictory. Some said she had arrived alone. Others suggested she had been met by a man. No definitive proof could be established. Meanwhile, back in Pittsburgh, new questions were being asked about how Catherine could have left the house. A thorough examination of the mansion was conducted, paying particular attention to any possible means of egress that might have been overlooked. It was during this examination that the police made an extraordinary discovery. In the basement of the house, behind a large wooden crate that had been used to store coal, there was evidence of recent disturbance. The floor was swept, suggesting that someone had been moving about in this space. And most significantly, there was a small window, no more than 2 feet in width and 3 feet in height, that had been placed there during the original construction of the house. This window was fitted with bars, as were all the ground floor windows, but the bars themselves appeared to have been tampered with. A closer examination revealed that the bars had been carefully filed on one side, weakening the metal. The filing marks appeared to be fresh, made within the days immediately preceding November 11th. The entire grate could be removed by someone with enough strength and knowledge of its weak points. The window itself opened onto a narrow passageway between the Hardcastle mansion and the neighboring property, a space that was barely 3 feet wide and was obscured from general view by the positioning of the building and the surrounding vegetation. The question that immediately arose was, how had Catherine, or someone acting on her behalf, managed to file through the metal bars of this window without being discovered? The work would have taken hours. The noise, though presumably not loud enough to be heard from upstairs, would have been noticeable to anyone passing nearby. And how had Catherine known that this particular window existed, that this particular weakness in the security could be exploited? This discovery pointed toward a scenario in which Catherine had not acted entirely on her own. Someone inside the house must have been helping her. Someone with knowledge of the mansion's layout, with access to the tools necessary to file through the bars, with opportunity to work on the window without being observed. The question of who this person was became the central focus of the investigation. The servants were interrogated again, this time under more intense scrutiny. Accusations were made, threats were delivered. The police even brought in a specialist from Philadelphia who was reputed to be expert in determining who was lying during interviews. Eventually, one of the housemaids, a young woman named Sarah Grimes, broke under the pressure and provided a confession. Sarah Grimes was 19 years old. She had been employed by the Hardcastle family for only 8 months. By all accounts, she was a quiet, unremarkable girl, the kind of servant that no one noticed, the kind of person who was present in rooms but somehow invisible. Her confession, delivered haltingly to the police detectives on November 25, 1887, revealed a side of the household that Augustus had managed to keep hidden from public view. Sarah stated that she had been approached by Catherine approximately 3 weeks before the disappearance. Catherine had asked to speak to her privately, and the two women had met in a back corridor of the house, away from the observation of other servants. Catherine had explained that she was in a difficult situation, that her marriage had become unbearable, and that she felt she had no choice but to leave. She had asked Sarah if she would be willing to help her. Sarah's initial reaction had been to refuse. She was afraid of losing her position. She was afraid of what Augustus might do if he discovered her involvement. But Catherine had been persuasive. She had explained that she was not asking Sarah to do anything illegal, merely to assist in a plan that would allow Catherine to leave the house without confrontation. She had promised Sarah a sum of money, $50, a substantial amount for a housemaid of that era. And she had promised that Sarah would not be punished, that once Catherine was safely away, Augustus would have no proof of Sarah's involvement. Over the course of 3 weeks, Catherine and Sarah had developed a plan. Catherine had somehow obtained tools, a small file and other instruments, and had given them to Sarah, along with instructions on which window to work on. Sarah, during her daily tasks, had managed to access the basement window repeatedly, working on the bars a little each day, filing through the metal millimeter by millimeter. The work was tedious and frightening. More than once, Sarah had nearly been discovered, but she had persisted, driven by sympathy for Catherine, by the promise of money, and perhaps by her own youthful sense of adventure and rebellion against the authority that Augustus represented. On the night of November 10th, Sarah had reported to the head butler that she was feeling ill and would be retiring early to her quarters. Instead, she had waited until the house was quiet and dark, and then she had gone downstairs to the basement. Catherine had met her there, having slipped out of her bedroom without being observed and made her way down the back stairs. The two women had worked together to remove the weakened window bars. The opening was tight, but Catherine, by contrast, had managed to squeeze through, pushing her leather bag ahead of her. Sarah had remained in the basement, replacing the bars as best she could in the darkness, hoping to delay the discovery of Catherine's absence. She had then returned to her room and gone to bed, maintaining the pretense of being ill the next morning until long after Catherine had had time to reach the railway station. Sarah's testimony, combined with the physical evidence of the filed bars and the testimony of the railway clerk who had seen a woman matching Catherine's description boarding a train, appeared to solve the mystery of how Catherine had left the locked house. What remained unsolved was what had happened to her after she had boarded that train to New York. Had she truly made her way to New York, or had she gotten off at some intermediate station? Had she traveled alone, or had Thomas Whitmore been waiting for her somewhere along the route? Where was she now? Sarah Grimes was arrested and charged with aiding and abetting the disappearance of Catherine Hardcastle, though it was unclear what crime Catherine had actually committed that would make Sarah an accomplice to anything. The charge seemed to fall apart upon examination. Catherine was not wanted for any crime. She had not stolen anything of significant value. She had merely left her home. No law that Sarah could be prosecuted under seemed to quite apply to the situation. In the end, Sarah was released from custody, though she was immediately dismissed from her position in the Hardcastle household. The authorities seemed unsure how to proceed with a case in which a wife had apparently abandoned her family, aided by a sympathetic household employee. The scandal had already destroyed Sarah's prospects for decent employment in Pittsburgh. She eventually left the city and moved to Ohio, where she is said to have found work in a textile factory. With the mechanism of Catherine's escape established, the investigation shifted to the question of her destination. The railway clerk Frederick Morrison had stated that the woman matching her description had purchased a ticket to New York City, but the trail seemed to go cold in New York. Detectives were unable to find definitive evidence that Catherine had actually boarded the train, or if she had, that she had gotten off in New York as intended. Augustus, meanwhile, had begun to receive letters. They arrived at the mansion over the course of the weeks and months following Catherine's disappearance. The handwriting was Catherine's, or at least a very good imitation of it. The letters did not contain much information, no addresses, no specific details about where she was or what she was doing, but they made one thing clear. Catherine was alive, and she was not coming back. "I cannot return to a life of captivity," one of the letters read. "I have chosen freedom, whatever the cost to my reputation or my standing. I ask that you release me from this marriage so that I might rebuild my life with dignity. I do not seek anything from you except to be left alone. If you force me to return, you will create a scandal that no amount of money can suppress. I suggest that you allow this matter to rest." Another letter received weeks later contained a single sentence. "Do not search for me. You will not find me. I am finally at peace." Augustus responded to these letters through his lawyers, offering Catherine a divorce on the condition that she return to Pittsburgh to appear before a judge. Catherine did not accept this offer. Instead, the letters became less frequent, and eventually they stopped arriving altogether. It was as if Catherine had truly disappeared from the world, not just from Pittsburgh, but from existence itself. The police investigation continued for months, then years. Possible sightings of Catherine were reported from various locations: New York, Boston, Philadelphia, even as far away as San Francisco. None of these sightings could be verified. None of them led to any concrete information about Catherine's whereabouts. The case eventually grew cold, relegated to the archives, discussed only in retrospective articles about Pittsburgh history. Thomas Whitmore was never found. No definitive proof was ever established that he had been involved in Catherine's escape, though the timing of his disappearance and Catherine's disappearance certainly suggested a connection. Some investigators theorized that Catherine and Whitmore had planned her escape together, that he had been waiting for her in New York,